We know that as Christians, we are supposed to forgive. But what about when we don't want to forgive? Or if it seems too hard to forgive? My name is Chad Moore. I'm the Minister to Students and Family Ministries, and this is Beyond the Notes. On Sunday, we talked about reconciliation. We saw the reconciliation that happened between Jacob and Esau, a reconciliation that if you were to ask anybody before verse 4 of Genesis 33, they would have called it unlikely, maybe even impossible. As Jacob sees his brother and 400 men on the way to meet him, he has nothing else to think besides the fact that this is not going to go well. And yet, what he didn't know is that a transformation had happened. Again, maybe not a spiritual, salvific transformation, but there has been change in his brother over these 20 years, and they're able to reconcile. And for many of us, we've had times, and maybe right now is one of them, in which we are estranged from someone that we have loved or do love. And that reconciliation seems equally impossible, whether it be because we need them to forgive us or we need to forgive them. Forgiveness is an important aspect of this reconciliation, that as a part of humbling ourselves and valuing things differently, it's often going to include forgiveness. If you have been sinned against, forgiveness is necessary. And when we talk about forgiveness and sinning against a brother or sister, Matthew 18 is often the passage that we turn to. And for more than one reason, we see a directive on how to handle things when a brother has sinned against you. We're told in Matthew 18, verse 15, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. And if he listens to you, you have gained your brother. Then it continues to tell us how to progress from there if we don't gain the brother. And then we see Peter come up to Jesus. It says, then Peter came up to him and said, now, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? Because Peter's listening to this and he's like, well, hold on, that sounds tough. Like, I understand forgiving my brother like a couple of times, but I mean, if it just keeps happening and he keeps sinning against me, what am I really supposed to do? I mean, 7 times? Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. Peter was probably even more discouraged as a result of that, because he was probably thinking of people who had harmed him, that he did not want to forgive, that he was still hurting over, and he was holding on to it. And so Jesus tells a story, tells us a parable starting in verse 23, one that I alluded to the principles of during the messages on Sunday. I want to read it to you now. It says, therefore the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his servants. When he began to settle, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. And since he could not pay, his master ordered him to be sold with his wife and children and all that he had, and payment to be made. So the servant fell on his knees, imploring him, have patience with me, and I will pay you everything. And out of pity for him, the master of the servant released him and forgave him the debt. But when that same servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii, which is much less a debt than the 10,000 talents. And with his newfound debt-free aspect of life, he decides to seize this man and begin to choke him, saying, pay what you owe. So his fellow servant fell down and pleaded with him, have patience with me and I will pay you. He refused and went and put him in prison until he should pay the debt. And when his fellow servants saw what had taken place, they were greatly distressed. And they went and reported to their master all that had taken place. Then this master summoned him and said to him, you wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. And should not you have had mercy on your fellow servant, as I had mercy on you? And in anger his master delivered him to the jailers until he should pay all his debt. So also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother from your heart. Not just 7 times, but as much as necessary. Now, we do need to clarify some things about this forgiveness. It doesn't mean that you forget it entirely and have the same level of trust with that person again. This servant shouldn't necessarily go and loan money to the same person that couldn't pay him the last time. And yet a forgiveness of sort is that principle that we need to apply in our lives. There is a physiological impact in our lives when we choose not to forgive or find it hard to forgive. There's a spiritual impact in our lives when we struggle to forgive those who have sinned against us. What we're supposed to learn from this parable here is just how much we've been forgiven and how much that should drive our own forgiveness of others. That does not mean it's easy to forgive. It does not mean, like I just said, that we forget when we forgive and act as if nothing has happened at all. Some of you are struggling to forgive some really big sins. Not just a small lie, but assault, rape, financial theft of grand scale. We don't need to trust that person again, but we do. Within the love of Christ that lives in us, need to find a way to forgive. If only just for our good and our relationship with Christ ourselves. And it is possible. Very difficult, but possible all the same. It can be just as unexpected as the reconciliation was between Jacob and Esau. And so if you are struggling to forgive, you are struggling to reconcile because of the forgiveness that is needed in order to reconcile, my prayer is that you reach out to God, call out to God for the help to forgive, for the power and the mercy and the love necessary to forgive. And join us again next week as we continue our series in Genesis.